transformational technology, and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Connor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. Welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Connor, and today our guest is Yaniv Bar-Dayan. He's a member of the Forbes Technology Council. He's a VC insider and the co-founder and CEO of VulcanCyber, a platform focused on vulnerability remediation. Yaniv, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Connor. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to this because one of the great challenges I think that faces every security leader out there is how do we take care of these vulnerabilities in our platforms, right? So everything from cloud misconfigurations to vulnerabilities in the operating system to third-party libraries, to the whole bit. It's one of those things that I think as an industry, we've really been trying to wrestle with and tackle with for a couple of decades now. And there's been a lot of technologies and tools in the markets to help us identify the problems, but I haven't seen much in the way of trying to solve the problems. So I'm really happy to have you here because I want to unpack a few things about this and really kind of just dive into the state of vulnerability management and what we should be doing differently to actually fix the problem versus just talk about the problem or highlight the problem. So I'd love to know, like, what got you down this road of dedicating your career, your life, your energy into building out VulcanCyber?
It's a great question, and you already said a couple of things I really like. And I'll start by saying that when you use the word vulnerability, you didn't take it to the traditional sense of a CVE on a certain operating system or third-party software we've installed. Vulnerability today in modern world has a broader sense and essence, as cloud misconfigurations, as bad code that can cause cross-site scripting, for example, or any of these other exposures that eventually puts us under risk on one of our digital assets. Now, when you look at my career particularly, the answer kind of divides into two. One is being an entrepreneur and actually building an organization that is running and flying based on your values, the way you think an organization should work, and obviously bringing people together. And this is something you can do in the cybersecurity space, but also in other areas the technology can help and assist, from healthcare to others. To me, my story around security started in my Army service. So I spent 6 years in a unit called 8200, which is the equivalent to the American NSA. Did a lot of cool stuff there. This is where, being an 18-year-old kid going out of high school and being dropped into this world where you learn everything that you haven't even imagined that is possible there. And I've had a tremendous service, and I've really got to a point where this world of security, cyber intelligence was flowing in my veins. And my first part of my civil career was for a company that was focusing a lot on incident response in many flavors, from training to trying to combat the CrowdStrikes of the world when they started with an endpoint technology. And me and, by the way, one of my co-founders who worked with me were always kind of shocked is how much money is being spent on detection, response, machine learning, AI, all of these tools, and how little people are investing in the actual basics. And it wasn't as clear as it is now. I mean, the entire market talked about 0 days in APTs, and no one talked about the fact that, you need to patch your systems because it's important. Without that, you're gonna flow. As we left our previous employer, me and my two co-founders, we had this idea of basically a vulnerability assessment scanner for cloud compute. This was like the fair, I would say, description of it. And I went and started pitching CISOs, and one CISO of an Israeli company, and I'm going to mention their name, but came in and I pitched, the idea in the normal enthusiasm of a young and hungry entrepreneur. And he told me, and I'm going to be delicate in my language here because I'm recorded. And he told me, Yaniv, after pitching him about this product is going to give him, endless amount of vulnerabilities. Only Yaniv, there is no way in hell, and I'm delicate here, that I'm going to buy another product that is going to provide me with another list of problems I will never get the chance to solve. And that was really impactful for us because this practically unpacked all of the problem in this side of the market. There are so many tools that are focusing and are doing a great job in providing visibility into either your existing infrastructure or modern types of digital assets like containers and cloud and so on. But all of them are doing very poorly when it comes to actually taking these findings and leading them to resolution. And this is where the journey started. When we started to understand the nuances of the problem, how big of a risk center cyber hygiene is, or how big of a cost center it is as well, because of the people that are involved, it was clear to us that this is where we need to invest our attention. And assuming we'll be able to meet the challenge, we're going to do something that is dramatic for the market. We're going to provide a dramatic change for the way the dynamics of this problem is being handled onwards. And this is what took us there all the way.
I'm so glad you got that customer feedback so early on, because I completely agree with this anonymous CEO or CISO, because I feel exactly the same way. I'm like, I've seen for a decade these tools that tell me problems over here, fire over here. And I'm like, great, now what? And they're like, we'll go fix it. And you're like, wait, there's a gap there in the middle. And that's the most important gap. And I think this is kind of one of the reasons that we see things like Equifax show up, is because it's like, it's not that it was a 0 day. It's not that it was particularly hard to exploit this. It was such a simple vulnerability. It's such a simple exploitation of a well-known vulnerability with a patch that was available. It was the remediation that bit them. It was the implementation of the patch that caught them. And just to think that, like, sometimes literally 143 million people's information is one right-click install away from being defended or not, kind of just shows you the gravity of the importance of getting the hygiene, as you call it, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that from that, it's also interesting because as a security engineer versus an incident responder. So think about this: two security people. One needs to respond to an incident, another one needs to mitigate risk. The incident responder is powerful. Once you have an incident, you can do practically whatever it takes to remediate the incident. When you are talking about risk, or things that might happen or are about to happen, or it takes you or you are binded into processes that are more rigid and strict. You always act through proxy. You have to work with IT, you have to work with engineering, you have to work with DevOps. And this is something that is very, very, very difficult for 1, 2, 3 security engineers or a small team of VM specialists to work with 50, 60, sometimes 100 different teams within a large enterprise, each one of them with their own policies, their own infrastructures, their own tools, and be not just a person who comes in with a problem, but actually comes in with a solution. And this is, to me, the core root problem here. We are in the world of risk mitigation powerless as security people, and unlike the world of incident response where we are powerful. And that's what takes us apart from being successful in this in the very beginning. We need to become more innate. We need to become enablers. We need to be people and work with the people around us in order to empower them towards remediation, and understand that we need to do more as security people to get the remediation done.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful insight. I mean, if nothing else, like, if the listeners of this podcast walk away with one thing, and it's like they heard that sentence, I think that would be transformative. And this idea that, like, just to reiterate what I heard you say there was, like, we have to stop coming forward with a list of problems, a list of risks that might happen, but really show up to the table with, like, hey, by the way, you can solve it by just implementing this, or you can solve it by doing X, Y, and Z, or better yet, let's implement a process where we're automatically fixing these things up front. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but I often feel about vulnerability management programs tend to look like a paper tiger, especially for organizations that are in the US, we follow the NIST 853 standards or ISO 27001 for international organizations, where you end up with these really beefy programs, but they don't tend to do much. And is it really coming down to just simply that we're not focusing on the solution, we're not focusing on the remediation? Like, what do you think leads to that sense?
I think it's a combination of three things. So let's imagine the process for a second of how not only a vulnerability management team, but vulnerability management, application security, cloud security teams are going through. They're getting a list of findings. And now they have to go through practically three different macro processes. These findings are coming out from a lot of different tools that are competing for the same remediation resources. So we need to first of all decide what out of everything we have is worthy of our attention. This usually takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but this is a contained type of effort within security. Then we need to find the path towards resolution, either with our allies in the operational side or without them. Now, path to resolution is very wide. As you said, we can implement a patch, but sometimes the patch is either impossible or just not the right path forward for our organization. And there are other options like competency controls and changes of configuration and others. They are not as apparent as patches, and they need to be researched, found. You don't really know about them. And the question arises is who should do that? Who should find the solution? Should it be security or should it be IT or engineering? And the answer is it's not so clear. You have this huge gap, this question of what should we do to resolve, and you don't even have the ability or the knowledge or the responsibility on who should do that. And then the step afterwards, once you already, let's assume you've solved that, let's assume you have these solutions in mind. Now finding the right person, the person who is responsible on the application or the person responsible on the server, or sometimes it's different and from team to team it's different. It's a very cumbersome data heavy process that doesn't have a lot of I would say the tools that are out there are not doing enough to gather all these things into one place and to empower the data that is already there in order to help take better decisions. This eventually just leads to a lot of manual work. So when you talk about paper tigers, it's exactly that. We're starting to tour around ServiceNow and open billion tickets with no context. We're starting to look for tons of vulnerabilities and trying to understand what connects to which asset or which application and what can we do in order to remediate more risk or reduce more risk. And all these things with tremendous manual effort. So to me, it starts with, if you say, what is the first step? What is the first step from being reactive to being more proactive? Is data. Let's start collecting the data from all different places and let's allow ourselves, instead of just throwing out tasks, actually thinking or create a mechanism, as you've said, a process. It allows us to automatically start disseminating data that is more meaningful and more actionable before even doing automation, from a data perspective.
That's really interesting. I want to touch on that for a second, because that's the second time on this podcast someone has said this, where that's one of our earlier conversations with James Chiappetta. He came up and said, like, vulnerability management at the heart is a data science problem. It's a big data problem. And if you can collect the data in the right place and then start to extract the patterns that are emerging, you can take that and go fix the root of the issue and stop the issues from resurfacing over and over again. So let's unpack that for a second. So how should security leaders be thinking about vulnerability management, not as as you're mentioning, a task to get done, but more of a step before that, a data analysis, data collection problem? How do we start getting our hands around that?
So I think it's just like building a good engineering organization and a good engineering flow. You need to migrate. When you look about modern engineering, you have migrated. We, as an industry, technology industry, have migrated from being slow, calculated, long-term, very inwards looking versus outwards looking, to being more agile, outwards looking, hungry for feedback. And it's kind of the same. When we look at every organization, this is something that we've learned the hard way in building Vulcan. There is no cookie cutter approach for vuln management or cyber hygiene, because every organization is facing different challenges that are rooted based on or rooted in their digital presence and the way they're operating around their digital offering. If you are a technology company, you're going to operate in a certain way, but if you are a retailer that has, a heritage of 100 years selling retail in shops, and you're migrating a small portion of your business into e-commerce, you're going to act differently around your programs. And for us, the first thing is breaking down the cycles, in my view, to a point where you understand what your allies need to operate quickly, and you're starting to work in order to bring this data in. So let's ask these questions for a second. What is, or how can we as security people take better decisions around vulnerabilities and what we should solve? The first thing, in my view, is migrating from what we call quantitative type of matrix to qualitative type of matrix. What do I mean? Counting how many vulnerabilities you have in a certain business unit or in a certain application doesn't mean anything. Taking the leap and migrating from the count to what is actually out there, from asking questions like, what is the outcome and what are my alternatives? Bringing a score of 10 or 15 or 20 is also not so meaningful. But being in a position where you know that if you are under high risk, this means if you have higher likelihood to be remotely exploited and being subjected to an attack of a certain point, it gives you the ability to take decisions that are smarter, like, put on a higher cyber insurance because you understand that you can't mitigate this risk right now, but you can do it later. To me, it's the combination of taking enterprise data that will give you the understanding on what are your assets and what is their posture. So when you look at risk, the likelihood of exploitation is eventually the asset posture and the usage of the vulnerability that is exposed on this asset in the wild. One is very much inner enterprise, the other one is very much outer enterprise. So let's bring these things together and understand how likely something to be exploited. The other side is impact, and this is very subjective. What is the impact of an exploitation for this particular asset? And this is something that eventually ties directly into the business logic. So bringing data from CMDBs or from cloud environments, or creating the mechanism to improve and enrich this data with your business knowledge. These are the paths that will help you take more data-driven decisions and will probably lead you to resolve a fraction of the vulnerabilities you think you need to solve faster and more accurately. This is the beginning.
I think that's a really powerful statement to talk about that, the impact. I think a lot of us, we get focused on, hey, it's remotely exploitable, that's bad. And we don't think about, okay, what happens next if what happens then? Because if we did, like, let's go back to the Equifax, not to belabor the point, but had they done a threat modeling session where they say, hey, if someone got on this box, what could they do? Oh, well, we have, our network is completely flat, and once you're in, you can move anywhere you want to. Or there are a bunch of credentials sitting on this box, and you can hop over and move laterally within the organization. Now, when you start to put out that entire attack lifecycle on paper, then you could really say, okay, the impact of this is really significant because there are no other compensating controls, because there are no this, that, and the other. Versus, as you were just saying, hey, you have 10 vulnerabilities on this box and 2 of them are critical and 8 or whatever.
But you know something? I can't blame them. So sorry for being very, very open and honest about it.
Yeah.
I can't blame them. I mean, it's an impossible mission. If you don't have the tools to do that, it's an impossible mission. How many vulnerabilities do we think Equifax had back then? More than 1 million?
More than one, that's for sure,
More than one for sure. And let me assure you, a company at that scale had north than 3 million known vulnerabilities. I would bet anything. And when it comes to that, everyone has it. I mean, let's be honest. All of us have these, and we need to be aware and cognizant that if we will continue to under address this threat, and I think the market had changed dramatically, and now it becomes a focus, like a real big focus point for many CISOs to resolve this, to start with the basics, then we'll be in a better position. But when in 2017, when Equifax happened, let's remind the audience here, Gartner said, stop investing in prevention, go and invest in detection and response. Change your budgets. Instead of 60, 70% on prevention, 30 on detection and response, move to 70% on detection and response and 30% on prevention. It was something that we have made as an industry. We as an industry caused ourselves to neglect a very big portion of security. And now we are migrating back to it and understanding you need to balance. And it's, and defense in depth is not only a phrase, it's something that you really need to do to have a good defense posture. So I don't blame Equifax, not even one bit.
I'm gonna go find that article with Gardner, because you think back and you're like, who would give that advice? I mean, well, actually, and I say it sarcastically, I know this, I know the tone. I've been in those conversations. Basically, it's let's throw our hands up in the air and say, hey, it's an unwinnable game. The best we can do is just like detect quickly, mitigate quick, and put a Band-Aid on it when it shows up, right? I think actually, so yes, I recognize that, so I said it kind of sarcastically, but it is mind-boggling that you're right, that we as an industry have moved to being in this state where we do believe that we've lost on day before the whistle's even blown. Like we've lost the game before it's even started, and then we don't stand a chance. So do you think this comes back to part of like on the incident response side, that's where we've found our power, so we kind of skew towards that? Or do you think it's just like the tooling in the industry is such that we just don't have the tools to fix the problems up front? Balance of both. Kind of what are you thinking that leads us into this overcorrection into detection response mindset?
So I think we're part of a unique industry. It's one of a kind, also historically. Like think of it, it's one of the probably the fastest growing industry around the world still, year over year for about 10, 15 years. It's an industry where you don't have a lot of expertise. Like you have a lot of people that are amazing cybersecurity practitioners, but then you have this huge gap of 6, 7 million positions that are unfilled and that are being filled by a lot of people that are not as experienced as we would wish them to be. And this is just, this is another self-correction. The industry is building itself slowly. And the outcome of that is that it's very easy to impact and influence how this industry behaves. And for better and for worse, this is an industry that is also being flooded for 2 decades with a lot of money. This money is being invested to try and convince you and try and convince me on what is good and what is not. So if a company raises $1 billion and is going to put half of it, half of the billion, into trying to convince everyone that detection and response is better, then people who think that detection and response is better. I think that the only stronger thing than cybersecurity marketing is reality, and reality always prevails. And it could be with Equifax or Cap One or any of the other things we're hearing, or now SolarWinds and everything that is happening. And it's honestly, to me, a matter of not luck but bad luck. Bad luck for the company that is being breached, and then luck for the vendors that happen to address this particular case for the company. Where the reality is, we need to understand that we are in this wild west situation where no one really knows what's really possible. Everyone are speculating, and we as security practitioners needs to have a clear strategy that is not influenced by fashion. It's influenced by a methodology. And I think we're starting to get there. I think that as an industry, we're starting to mature to not only be binded into tech, but mainly be binded into technology. And by the way, Connor, this is also something that we apply in Vulcan, because Vol management is not only a tech problem. Application security is not only a tech problem. It's also a process problem and a people's problem. So before we wrote even one line of code, we asked ourselves, how can you mature vulnerability management application security programs and then build the platform to address the methodology, and not vice versa, build a product and then try to convince everyone why this is a good thing for them.
So let's go into that for a second, because I have seen some of this methodology that you've put out there as a team, which is this remediation maturity model. And I think this is a really powerful framework for senior leaders to really rally around when they want to get more of a concrete understanding of where they are on fixing the problems before they materialize, before the risk realizes. So if I remember correctly from doing my research for our conversation today, your team had worked with Pulse and done a survey of CISOs, CIOs across a wide breadth of individuals. And what I found interesting in that was this kind of like overconfidence to where we stood as an industry into fixing our vulnerability problems. I think the survey came back and said 84 respondents said they felt their programs were mature. But then when your team looked deeper and figured out, hey, let's pull back the covers and actually look at these programs, we found that wasn't reality. It was just a false perception that they had. So it's kind of a two-part question there. Can you kind of give me your thoughts on this? Why as security leaders, we tend to be overconfident in this area of vulnerability management when clearly we're not that strong as an industry? And then two, how the remediation maturity model might be a framework and a tool set that we could be implementing.
It's An amazing question. And I'll start by saying that it's a matter of even language. So when we framed the question, we asked, I think that the exact phrase was, as a security leader in your organization, how do you feel your vulnerability management program is mature? How mature it is from 1 to 10? And when we use the frame and the wording vulnerability management and purpose. We wrote vulnerability management, most of them put it at 8 or 9 and so on. And then the follow-up question was, for each portion of your vulnerability management program, how mature it is. And you had vulnerability assessment, prioritization, delegation, remediation, da, 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 da. Everything that was not vulnerability assessment was less than 30, 40%. Vulnerability assessment was 80, 85. And it takes us back to the same nuances. We, as an industry, we got used to being responsible only on showing what's the problem. We were educated to say, we are raising this flag, and then it's the business's responsibility to react and decide what they should do. And I think that we as an industry are changing. And for us, the vulnerability management maturity model is another way to support this change, because I don't know today almost any cybersecurity analysts or security engineers or CISOs that say, all I need to do is report the risk to the board, and this is where my job ends. And they know that if an unpatched vulnerability will be part of a breach, they will probably be the first person to hear about it and to also probably suffer the consequences. So applying the maturity model, looking at that, basically says two things. And I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's very technical, but generally, most vulnerability management, application security, cloud security posture management programs are reactive. And the question is, how can you know and how can you push yourself to become proactive? And there are three things. One, we talked about data-driven, from quantitative, qualitative. How can we create measurements, KPIs, helps us understand what are the most impactful things we can do to reduce the risk, and what is the meaning of not doing something, and what are our alternatives, like doing a better ransomware insurance, for example, if we're willing to accept a risk. Then how can we implement and orchestrate processes? So not only security process, but actually cross-organizational processes. How can we put them into an engine that is robust, continuous, visible enough for everyone to be effective and to practically take away all this paper pushing activities we're doing as vulnerability management teams or application security teams. And lastly is what we call the holy grail of these programs, to democratize them. Because let's look at the essence of this problem. Vulnerability management is not an information security problem. It's not even a CIO's problem. It's the CEO's problem. Why is that? Because when you go and you want to reduce cyber risk, what you're actually doing is that you are trying to balance two different types of issues. One is your risk to get breached, and the other one is the operational risk that might derive from the process of mitigating the cyber risk. So when you have a production application that is being used by 1 million users, and every hour of downtime costs $100 million for your organization, and now you've found a super severe vulnerability on the server that will require a restart and reinstallation that will take about an hour. And the outcome of that, and on the outcome of a breach might be PIIs being stolen and a GDPR lawsuit that might eventually lead to a $100 million fine. Who takes the decision what's worst? Who comes in and say, what should we do? Should we have an hour in downtime, lose $100 million, or should we accept the risk of maybe being sued in the future because we've broken our compliances? And this is not a decision for the CISO, and this is not a decision for the CIO. This is a decision for the CEO. So us as security practitioners, we have to democratize this data and send it in order to eventually allow the business people, the operational people to operate around risk as it was yet another task in their hands. And this is the hardest part in my view.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that decision does lie up with the CEO. I think as an industry, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we said that we're there and we're able to gather the right data, we're able to normalize it into a decision point for a CEO, and the CEO can make that decision. I think a lot of organizations are still, they're not even there yet. I don't think it's even making it up to that. What would be a really quality conversation is like the people are struggling there. I think part of that is a bit of a tooling, it's education, it's language barriers between that, so on and so forth. So, because I think what you just highlighted is exactly where the decision should be lying. So can we talk about a little bit what you at the team of VulcanCyber are doing to help close this gap? Because you've mentioned data analytics a few times. I know you guys got like this really cool integration with like Snowflake on the back end, which is awesome. I've seen some of the business analytics portions of it to bring forth those intelligent decision conversations. So let's dive into what you're building here and how that helps close the gap.
Yeah, perfect. So two macro assumptions that came in when we started building Vulcan. One, every security company that has a perception or hope to migrate engineers from working on their tools to working on the security tool are somewhere between crazy to delusional. It won't happen. So the first most important thing is we need to build something that helps security teams consolidate, but then has the ability to distribute all the data into the systems of record and systems of action of security DevOps IT. It could be your data lake, data warehouse like Snowflake. It could be your ServiceNow. It could be your Jira. It could be your Chef, Puppet, Ansible, SSCM, Jenkins, CircleCI, wherever they work. So for us, it was first and foremost, let's take the data from all of the relevant tools, both security tools like infrastructure scanners, Inspector, Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, code scanners, checkmarks, Veracode, Synopsys, Sonatype, whatever, cloud scanners now also, Prisma Cloud, Redlock, that was Wiz, Orca, and such. Bring data from the asset inventories themselves, connect directly to your cloud infrastructures, directly to your code repositories to understand asset posture. Fuse all these things together to create a very, very, very thorough understanding of the risk to your digital assets, manage these digital assets as well. And then in turn, start enriching this data with external data, both around remediation paths, as well as threat intelligence gives you more breadth on the likelihood. Now, at this certain point, you have one platform for security. So security engineers that used to work on 5, 6, 7 scanners now see everything in one place and in a more distilled and better way. Now, the second part is start disseminating this data automatically, either in the form of actions or in the form of tickets, scripts, whatever it takes to make sure that DevOps engineer that opens up the day and has 15 tasks, we look at the security task as it was yet another one on their docket. Prioritize in the way they're used to, weighted in the way they're used to, with the timelines and with the abilities in the way they're used to. And this is probably for the traditional side of the house, wherever you can automate even more. So, compute workloads, Dockers, and so on. Just flip up the switch and do it automatically. And it's the best comparison I always say. In a security operations center, we matured dramatically in the past 10, 15 years. From having desktop security engineers and firewall engineers, we have now SOC analysts that sees everything in one place and have tools like Cortex or Phantom to do things automatically for them. In the world of pre-breach, in the pre-incident world, outside of the SOC, we still haven't been able as an industry to create a platform similar to the SIEM and SOAR platforms in the SIEM, in the security operations center. And this is exactly what Vulcan is trying to do, to provide the other side of the house with the same tools to consolidate, automate, and drive actions more effectively.
I love this because it goes back to like this core ethos that like I somehow latched on this phrase after decades of smashing my head against the wall, a decade of smashing my head against the wall. And I realized the solution here is enable and empower so people can move faster and safer. So if we can, as a security community, build tool sets, build products, build solutions that enable the engineering teams and developers to enable them and empower them to do the right things, embed the right safeguards into it so they can move faster and safer. It seems to be the only way for it. So it's really great to get a little bit of feedback from a leader in the industry who sees this as well, and that you guys are actually building those tool sets that go towards giving DevOps and all them the tools they need to actually fix these problems. Now, there is something else pretty cool. You mentioned threat intelligence that your team has put out, which is the Remedy Cloud project.
Mhm.
I was really excited when I heard about this. So can you unpack this? Like, tell us about Remedy Cloud is, and if people want to explore where that project is and how to get their hands on it, where they would go for that.
Definitely. So, taking two steps back, when we talked about a problem, one problem that I've really stressed out is how can I find what is the right solution for this particular vulnerability or other. What we found out as we started building our technology is that there isn't really one single place where you can search for answers to this question. Like how should I, even not even just what should I do, but even if you say I'm going to patch, what patch is going to be the right patch? How should I do it? How should I write it? What are the dependencies? Tons of questions. And we said, okay, this is a huge constraint and a huge gap. Let's start building this database in a robust, scalable way that will be updating real time. We'll be collecting these solutions from everywhere we can find them, from the Microsoft knowledge base down to Stack Overflow and GitHub, everything structured and unstructured into one place. And in the first year, we were able to create a database that had more than 10 million different solutions. And we said to ourselves, okay, we have something very strong here. A year after, we realized that we just can't keep this data only in our hands. And 2.5 months ago, we have released a community version of this database. This database name is Remedy Cloud, or eventually, by the way, anyone can find it today in remedy-cloud.com. It's really a very easy interface that allows any security person to just search for a vulnerability in this particular community version CVEs and get all of the relevant solutions from an operating system perspective, from a type of solution perspective, so both patches, but also configuration changes, workarounds, and so on, and even download a version of these in actionable type of way. So you can download an Ansible script or a Chef script or a Puppet script that you can then use and implement in your Linux environments in order to eventually patch these problems. So any user who wants today to get an answer to this problem or to look if there are other abilities apart from patches to resolve the vulnerability can go to Remedy Cloud and actually enjoy that. We have users today in Remedy Cloud that are submitting and suggesting solutions that they have found, the format of compensating controls or configuration changes to remediate. And we generally very much believe that the involvement of the community in building and supporting that is going to be crucial. So we are starting as a company to advocate our users and our community to practically do that more and more and more, and eventually drive to the point where we are continuously improving this database, providing the wisdom of the crowd to a point where you can find any solution that you want that will be appropriate for your environment.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Like, where was this a decade ago? So I'm really glad that you guys are building this and bringing it to the market, because this is such an incredible project. I can just think of all the technology leaders, all the people who are IT and they're stretched and they have to deal with security, or CISOs that are just stretched way too thin, who are like, I have this problem. Where's my solution? Head over to remedycloud.com. So Yaniv, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I just want to say to anyone who's listening here, go check out that vulnerability maturity model that we discussed. Head over to vulcan.io. You can download the longer framework of that and get into those details that Yaniv was talking about. And then also go explore Remedy Cloud. It is as powerful as he says it is. It's a pretty cool project. So Yaniv, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much, Connor. It's been a pleasure.